Arguments can be one of the hardest things you can do in any social relationship or social interactions for two reasons. The first one is because you have to confront the other side and tell them something that you know they will disagree with you about, and you have to tell them stuff that they may not like. And the second reason is there are a lot of things happening in a very short time. You need to think about your own arguments, you need to think about what they're saying and maybe counter arguments, and the most difficult thing that you need to think about as all of these things are happening and you're hearing the other side is keeping your emotions in control and in place without letting them impact you. And this is the hardest thing that I've seen people struggle with. And here are 3 things you can do to win in arguments and succeed in them. The first thing you need to do is identify the objective of the argument. What is your objective? What is your goal? And you need to keep your ego on the side. Now, objectives can be different. It can be, I want to work with this person and I want us to be aligned on achieving this goal together rather than understand who's to blame and who is at fault. Another objective could be, I want to win that argument and shut the other person up regardless. Now, I might argue that that is counterproductive and you will damage that relationship. But for you, you don't care because you don't care about the relationship and you don't care about what might happen. Now my point is, you just need to identify that goal, and once you do, write it on a paper, or at least memorize it, remind yourself about it. The second step is, practice your talking points. This can be done in multiple ways. I'll share with you my personal experience as to how I did that in one very, very difficult upcoming argument that I was anticipating. But preparing your talking points can be done differently. You can write them down, you can just write some keywords, you can even practice them ahead of time. Now, in my opinion, talking points vary depending on the person that you're going to argue with. If the other person is emotional, make sure that you touch on their emotions. If they are logical, you have to be objective. By objective meaning, you have to make sure your talking points are based on facts that the other person can understand and can also argue on, or maybe will be very hard for them to disagree with, again, if your facts are supporting what you're saying. And this is extremely, extremely important and beneficial so that when the argument gets heated and the other person might try to offend you or insult you, your emotions are intact. You will not let your emotions get the best of you because, why? You have your talking points prepared ahead of time, regardless of how the argument is taking place, what the other person is saying, you're sticking to your talking points or your script. In fact, that's what I did in some of the arguments that I was about to get into that I knew the other person may not be as friendly as I would like them to be. And finally, understand the person that you're going to argue with before you argue with them. In 2 ways. Understand their personalities and understand their objectives. Again, different people tick differently. Some of them are objective, logical, analytical. Some of them like humor. Some of them are emotional. Make sure you understand that if you can. Also understand their objective. For example, you and another stakeholder are working on a project and you're arguing about how to execute during that implementation of whatever it is in your project. You might think that you guys both want the same thing. You both want this project to be a success. In my experience, that's what I assumed in multiple cases, and it just turned out to be not the case. The other person couldn't care about whether this project is a success or not, and instead they cared more about how they looked to other stakeholders and their performance throughout that project, regardless of the objective. Also, understand their personalities. Again, this is extremely difficult. It just comes with experience and sometimes only with the feedback of different people who have the ability to be emotionally aware about what's going on in a room and can read the room as well when they engage with different stakeholders in a discussion. God knows I was not able to do that for many times, for many years, but again, trying to understand what is behind those words, what is behind this person, and how can I engage with him in a productive way, and try to get feedback from those who are senior to me. And maybe sometimes I need to meet with the person one-to-one before we engage in a bigger and larger meeting where arguments might escalate if I don't align with him or her. Reading the room is a skill. Understanding how people are wired emotionally and logically is also a skill. If you walk into a room and you feel like it's heated and you feel like each person might be difficult to deal with, sit with yourself afterwards, write down what you know about each person and what you picked up from sitting in that room which will also help you identify your talking points should you need to do so if something would escalate to an argument later on. I was never a person who was good in confronting people or even having productive arguments. In fact, I try to avoid them whenever I can, hoping that the other person might understand some hints that I might throw here and there, or might understand from my body language that I was not happy with them, and that would tick them or nudge them to behave the way that I wanted or hoped from them. But that was not the case. People sometimes don't work that way, and you have to confront them. So what happened with me was, there was one project I was working with a group of people, and one person was taking advantage of us who are working hard, while him was relaxing, going on vacations. It was quite upsetting for me, and I grew tired of that because even when he did produce some work, I had to rewrite what he did, or my fellow team members had to do the same thing. I had enough of that, and I had to confront him. And the way I did was, I kind of exploded in his face rather than have a productive discussion. That got him to behave better or more productively throughout the project later on, but it just damaged the relationship between us. So even if he did work harder than what he used to before, it was just not a pleasant environment to work with anymore. Why? Because I was just not able to communicate how upset I was with their performance in that project. It took me many years and many uncomfortable confrontations for me to understand that, okay, that person might have done something that I disagree with and they needed me to confront them, but it's also equally important that I do that productively in a way that I would win them over rather than push them away further with me yelling, raising my voice, or just pointing out everything that they did wrong and how they suck in a certain project, or they just don't perform well. But one thing that I kept on doing is not avoid confrontation and also seek feedback from those who might have been involved in that situation, which is how I came up with those 3 points that I just shared with you. So I hope that was helpful. Let me know from your experience, what would you do if you were put in a situation where you had to argue with the other person, and how would you approach it in a way where it's productive?